A few hours later we were strolling along the lane to the Lamb. The sun hung low in the red sky behind us, making our long shadows walk in front of us. Hardly a car passed us on the well-worn single-track road. To the right, the hills gradually sloped up into the distance. The ground was covered in purple heather, which glowed in the setting sun like dying embers. The gentle slope was broken only by a few crags and small groups of Scots pine. To the left, the land sloped down towards a small meandering river. It was mostly grass with patches of marsh. Small groups of sheep were wandering around freely. There was no fence between the road and the land, and the sheep scurried away when we came close. The only sound was their occasional bar, until a skylark started singing. We must have come close to its nest, causing the mother to distract us away from it. At length Jake began. "Okay. First, I would like to know why I should join the church. Isn't it just a bunch of rules invented by men to keep people in their place? Can't I just have my own relationship with God?" Where should I start? God came to earth in the person of Christ to set up his church, and promised that the gates of hell would not prevail over it. Without the church, what are we to believe? Where do we go for answers? We're still lost. God may exist, but we cannot say anything at all about him for sure. It's all a matter of opinion. The church is the collective wisdom of all believers, of all the saints, over 2 millennia. The church has rules to guide us to God, which have been established out of experience. Like Chesterton said, it's not wise to tear down a fence until you're absolutely sure why it was put up there. The church offers us a map which shows us how to find our destination. Do you want to rip it up and find your own way through the dark forest? So you're saying the Christian church is the only way to God? Isn't that an outrageous claim? I'm saying it's the surest and safest way to God. You might make it across the Atlantic in a rowing boat, but it's better to go in a large ship, right? Jake mused for a while, then, "I guess it all hangs on the truth of the historical event. Was there a man called Jesus? Was he the Son of God? Did he die and come back to life?" Yes, it all hangs on that. Most people, even the hardline atheists, now accept the evidence that Jesus was a real person. But like the Jews and the Muslims, they don't accept that he was the Son of God and rose from the dead. It is an outrageous claim, of course, but those who deny it have to explain away many questions, such as why the apostles were transformed. When Jesus died, they cowered away in terror, fearing crucifixion. Even when Christ appeared to them, they still hid. What changed them was Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit entered them. This is when they were transformed, regenerated, filled with divine love. At that point, they lost all fear. As St. John says, perfect love drives out fear. They went out and openly proclaimed Christ. Each one of the apostles was martyred. Their faith was invincible. They did not keep their faith through the agonies of torture because of an idea, an intellectual concept, but because God was in them. Well, maybe they were just deluded. Psychologists have studied the hallmarks of deluded people: constantly changing, veering between self-doubt and unreasonable conviction, unable to get their lives together, severe mood swings, difficulties forming relationships. The apostles showed none of these signs. They were calm, full of purpose, steady, joyful right to the end. a group of deluded people would have ended up fighting and going their separate ways. But the apostles were in harmony with each other over decades, right up to the end. Despite the earth-shattering events and the ecstasy, they remained sane, balanced people. St. Gregory of Nyssa has this nice phrase which sums it up: sober drunkenness. Jake laughed. I could have done with some of that myself, eh? But why does God, if he's so loving, allow the innocent to suffer, even babies? By now the sun had set. The red sky was fading to grey, and a chill came into the air. We rounded a bend in the road, and a few stone cottages came into view. Well, imagine a pain-free world for a moment. Wouldn't people just forget about God and get on with their lives? Guaranteed food, all the comforts. Won't we just spend all our lives on the sofa, eating junk food, drinking beer, and watching telly, like those people who win the lottery? Think about your own story. Maybe the suffering is leading you to God. If we consider it from the perspective of eternity, the time we spend on this planet is nothing, the blink of an eyelid. An instant of pain, which, if lived rightly, can lead to an eternity of living at God's side. Maybe God allows us to suffer in this life in order to reach eternal love. Jake frowned and replied, but what if the pain is unbearable? It is unbearable without God. That is exactly why we need him. We are not created to live apart from God. He is in our makeup, in our spiritual DNA. If you try to rip a part of yourself out, of course things will go badly. Atheists ask why God allows pain, but they refuse to take his medicine for it. I never heard it put like that. I guess it'll take time to sink in. Anyway, here's the pub. Inside, a log fire was blazing. The room was dark, with a low timbered ceiling and stone walls. The only two customers were two men at the bar, discussing a lamb which was stuck halfway down a cliff face. The trouble of rescuing it was more than the animal was worth. You know our Becky though, big softy. She's going to go out tomorrow and try to rescue it. I said, fine, just don't break your neck, Kenny. The barman smiled as we approached. He nodded at my monk's clothes and said to Jake, you bring some right ones in here, don't you? He grinned to me. Only joking, son. A friend of his is a friend of ours. He started pouring a half of the local ale for Jake. I was impressed that he had cut his measure down from a pint. Same for you, Mr. Monk? Yes, thank you. How are we getting on painting the cottages then? The barman asked. I could have fallen off the bar stool. Jake painting cottages? First time he's done anything useful in a long time. It's coming on slowly. He turned to me. Don't look too surprised, man. I got bored, decided to do something useful for a change. Well, to be fair, I suppose I've never been one for practical work. Or any other kind, I laughed. Jake shrugged, no point denying that one. The barman chipped in. He's not a bad worker once he gets started. That to show him a few things, but he learns well, right enough. He's a canny lad. What's on the menu then, Duncan? Asked Jake hopefully. Menu? Oh yeah, we do offer a range of choices. Cheese toasties, ham toasties, or if you want to splash out, ham and cheese. An ice cream for dessert, if chef can manage it. He smiled. We'll settle for plain cheese, no need to go crazy, Jake quipped. Right you are, I'll get the chef onto it. He shouted through the hatch. Maureen, 2 cheese toasties, pet. Nothing but the best in here, you see, laughed Jake. Come on, let's sit by the fire. We sank into 2 ancient but comfortable leather armchairs and watched the flames for a while in silence. A variety of farm implements hung from the ceiling. A few faded prints of countryside scenes on the wall. Red carpet with compulsory swirls. The 2 at the bar continued their conversation about the lost sheep, and Jake resumed their own one. So, if the church is God's representative, why is it so sexist and hierarchical? Well, we believe that women and men were created different by God. Each has their own characteristics, their own particular beauty. The modern world would abolish the distinction, but are we any happier for it? Hasn't it led to confusion? Jake nodded thoughtfully, not entirely convinced. He continued, and why is the church a hierarchy instead of a democracy in this day and age? Our God, the Holy Trinity, is a hierarchy. God the Father stands over the Son and the Holy Spirit. But it is a hierarchy of love, not power. Within the church, those at the top have a grave responsibility to love and care for those below them. They also have a responsibility to pass down the tradition to the next generation. They do not have the freedom to innovate. In some of the Protestant churches, the particular collection of folk who happen to run the church at any one time are able to change things as they see fit. But that is not our way. As Chesterton said, in the church the ancestors get a vote. Those who overturn the ancient teachings overstep the boundaries of power entrusted to them. Our insistence on keeping the old beliefs stems from humility. Who are we to overturn what has been revealed by God in His church? Jake looked thoughtful and sat quietly for a while, sipping his beer and taking it all in. Well, that's a different take for sure. Funny how you can get to my age without hearing the other side. I suppose you have to learn to trust the church, eh? Yes, and that takes time. Took me a long time. But over a few years I came to see that the church expressed my deepest beliefs. The church shaped me, but shaped me into who I was already. The modern way is the opposite. Make the church conform to humanity instead of conforming humanity to God. It is only when we conform to God that we live up to His image, which He gave to each one of us. All the rules, all the theology, all the funny customs, they're all designed to bring us to God. That is the task of the church. This is why we're so reluctant to meddle with things, and why the world sees us as backward. Jake was staring into his glass, deep in thought, when the toasties arrived. There you are, gentlemen, smiled Duncan as he put the plates down. Will you be requiring cutlery? He asked ironically. I wouldn't dream of causing Chef the trouble of washing that up as well as the plates. Jake laughed. Too kind, sir. Duncan bowed with a straight face. The evening wore on, with a kind of conversation more familiar to us Christians than to atheists. Things that had become patently obvious to me over many years of reflection had to be spelt out with great patience to someone who was new to it all. It occurred to me that it was like trying to persuade a person who has never seen an aeroplane fly to get on board. The idea of flight to a person in the Middle Ages would have been wholly improbable, whereas we take it for granted. They will ask for proof that the thing will stay in the air before they consent to get on board, but we can't provide it. One either gets on board or one doesn't. I could sense Jake's frustration. He could sense his old paradigm was collapsing, but he could not let it go, as a new one had not yet been formed. One cannot change one's whole mindset overnight, but he knew he did not have the luxury of time stretching before him, so the tension of his decision was made all the more acute. Monks are supposed to cultivate patience, but I admit to having little success overcoming my desire to hear Jake's big secret. I did try and press him once, but he replied, "The night is young, bonny lad. I'll get there. But your glass is empty. I'll get them filled up." "I'll just have a tea, Jake. Do they serve Earl Grey?" "Tea? Are you feeling unwell?" "I'm fine. I've just had enough beer, thanks." "Why, we've only had 2 halves, man." "That's enough for me nowadays. I'm getting too old." "Aye, fair enough." Jake ambled to the bar. "Same again for me, Duncan. Do you serve Earl Grey?" "What the devil is that, son?" It's a kind of tea." No worries. A regular tea will be fine." When the drinks came, Jake continued firing his theological questions. I wondered how much of it was an attempt to avoid discussing a secret, but decided to press no further. As we walked home, it was so dark we could barely see the road. "Should have bought me torch, eh?" Jake laughed. "I think we'll end up in a ditch." "Maybe I shouldn't have had that last drink." We drew our coats tighter around us to keep out the biting wind. I looked up. What a sight! It is only in the remote countryside that you see the stars in their thousands. The miracle of the cosmos was ample proof to me of God's existence. The idea that it all came into being by random chance seemed ludicrous. But we had been down that avenue already this evening, so I kept my silence. My mind returned once more to the childhood experience of flying through the cosmos, a universe so huge and yet so small one could reach out and touch the far end. I recollected the Greek origin of the word cosmos. It means adornment. Just as cosmetics adorn a human face, the cosmos adorns God, giving us a glimpse of his beauty. The ancient Greeks knew that the cosmetic is merely the external appearance, designed to draw us to what lies beyond. Our culture forgets this, focusing only on the outward beauty of the universe, instead of its creator. Jake saw me looking at the stars, and we stopped walking to gaze at them. As if reading my mind, he said, "When I was a kid, I used to ask me dad, what was at the end of the universe? If the universe is expanding, what's it expanding into? What if the expanding universe hits a wall? Is there an infinite space which the universe can expand into? It's the same with time, isn't it? Did time have a start? It doesn't make sense that it started at a certain point because what was going on before then? But it also doesn't make sense that time has always been there, because if there's an infinite amount of time before we existed, we would never have gotten round to existing." I replied, "In communist Russia, they made an old monk look through a telescope. 'Look how science has revealed everything clearly now,' they laughed. 'No need for your God anymore.'" The old monk smiled. "Where your telescope ends, our God begins." Jake replied, "Something you said earlier about everything being held together in God. I think I know what you mean. A few days after I had that dream, I came out one night to look at the stars. I had the feeling like everything was not in its own box anymore. It was all connected, all held together. I can't explain. The stars felt my pain. Tanya's pain, Jeff's pain, the face of Jeff when he was born, her first smile as a baby, us sitting together at the back of Mr. Moss's physics class. So many things came into my mind, and it was all held together, like in a huge web or inside a huge egg. Am I talking rubbish, or does that make any sense, Mark?" "It makes total sense. This kind of insight is given to us by God sometimes as a gift. Some of the old monks live in this kind of state most of the time. Really? I don't think I could cope with that, mind. Too much for me poor little head. We started walking again in silence. After some time, Jake took up again. When Tanya died, I just couldn't live. You know, I stopped caring for myself. If I lived or died, I was consumed with guilt. I had killed her, robbed her of life, her precious life, and robbed all the people that love her. I was full of guilt that Jeff didn't have a mother and that he had such a useless father. I just had to keep drinking to blot it out, and that just made it worse. I knew Jeff blamed me, but he wouldn't say it. In the end, he wouldn't even speak to me. When he went to live with Tanya's mum, it hurt, but I knew it was for the best. Guilt. It's an awful thing, right? But I just can't shake it. And your lot? You're big on guilt, aren't you? I sighed and let Jake's words hang in the sharp northern air. We are big on healing guilt. We take it to the altar and dump it there like a sack of stones. It does not happen overnight, but the guilt does heal with time, with God's help. It stops festering and creating more and more layers of misery. Maybe things are never fully healed, but we find a way to carry on. Jesus tells us, carry your burden lightly. Jake stopped walking and leaned on a gate. He started with a coughing fit, but after a few minutes it turned into deep sobs. I put my arms around my old friend and felt the fragility of his shaking frame.